parents who are inconsistent, spouses that are inconsistent, individuals, just friends that are inconsistent. It's very difficult to have relationships with them because you don't know how they're going to react from one moment to another.
Mm.
What do you do? Well, you cannot change people. You know that. I cannot change my spouse or my friend or my child or my parents. I can't change people. People who set about trying to change other people usually get frustrated because you can't change people. You can change yourself. How? First of all, have boundaries in your life. Change yourself. Don't be afraid to say no. But healthy boundaries doesn't mean you go around life saying no, 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 no. That's sad. Then you live in a
Yeah,
cave. But
yeah,
healthy boundaries are you knowing when to say yes,
yeah.
but knowing when to say yes, not just saying yes for the sake of approval.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we are blessed to have Dr. Vani Marshall back on the podcast. She is a cognitive therapist with a doctorate in counseling and a master's in psychology. In this episode, Dr. Marshall talks about what boundaries are, why it is important to establish boundaries in your life, how to recognize if you are in an unhealthy relationship, and much more. Well, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Marshall.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Greg. It's nice to see you again, back on Hacker Podcasts.
Yeah, it's so great having you back on, and we've had such tremendous reports of your previous times on, especially the episode you did about mental health. So many people talked about how that had blessed them, and they had used a lot of the practical tips that you had put in that episode and applied them to their lives. So I was so happy that you agreed to come back on, and today you wanted to talk about boundaries. Setting boundaries, relationships, that sort of thing. Would you mind starting us off with what you want to talk about here today?
You know, all of us are involved in relationships, at some point, and with our parents, siblings, spouse, children, friends. We're made for relationships, but I don't think it was, it is the will of God. I don't think it's the will of God for us to have broken or unhealthy relationships, and very easily, because as the saying goes, if you love deep, you hurt deep. And so very easily we can fall into a pattern of unhealthy relationships if we don't apply adequate healthy boundaries. A boundary is really the actual terminology or definition of boundary is any line or thing marking a particular limit. A boundary tells you what your limit is. And so you cannot have a limit-free relationship. Even God has his limits. He desires us to respect him and worship him. He
Right.
does not want us to disrespect him. He does not want us to go against his wise counsel. That's God's limit. So if God has limits, we need to have limits. And when we enter into relationships, when we enter into relationships that do not have limits and we don't set adequate boundaries, then what happens is it can become very easily unhealthy. What I want to focus today, Greg, is not just any relationship, but how we can develop boundaries in codependent relationships. Now, I will,
Okay.
of course, want to define what codependent relationship is. And as we go along, codependent people, they don't know, they don't have limits. They don't set limits. But that's not the only characteristics of codependency. Codependent people invite emotional abuse. They actually put up with emotional abuse. Yes, they will put up with it because they feel that they're not worthy of respect or love, or and because of that, they're not able to form firm boundaries. So they allow other people to step on their boundaries, and codependent people get manipulated by other people all the time. The
Wow.
reason is because they don't have boundaries. They allow it. So who do you really blame? It's the codependent person. They have, it is their fault. But then, how do they become? How can they be free of this? they approach a professional or a counselor or someone that can tell them, well, this is what's making you codependent. This is how you can get away from it. This is how you can come out of this codependent relationship. This is how you can stop being manipulated by other people. And codependent people, they crave approval.
Mhm.
They crave
Yeah.
approval, and it is okay to desire other people's approval. It is okay. In fact, it's normal. We want God's approval. We want people's approval. We want the approval of our children, our spouse, our parents from a very young age. But then it is not okay to crave it to the point where you will allow yourself to be manipulated just to be approved.
Mm.
So, I mean, and therefore, codependent people, as I said, there is more than one characteristic of a codependent person. There is several that defines what a codependent person is. They are not assertive enough to express their feelings because they're so afraid of being rejected. So
Right.
they won't express their feelings. They're so afraid of being rejected. They won't tell a manipulative person, "Can you stop manipulating me? Can you stop stepping all over my boundaries? Can you stop pushing me around? Can you stop, making me feel guilty for the things I don't have to feel guilty about? Can you stop guilt tripping me into every, I think it's not really a new word, but it's sort of a new word, guilt tripping.
Yeah.
It's a phrase that I use to describe how people can guilt other people into doing what they need to do. I mean, if you love me,
Yeah.
you would do this. If you really cared, if you were a really good husband, you would stop doing this and you would do this. Now it's okay to communicate your feelings about a particular subject matter. It's okay to tell someone you need to stop doing that, or you need to stop behaving in that way if the behavior is bad. But then
Mm.
guilt tripping is different. Guilt tripping is where you tell someone, well, if you really, really cared about me, if I meant anything to you at all, then you will do this, when you know you're asking them to do something that is not even right.
Mm.
When you're asking somebody to do something that's not right, that's not acceptable in God's eyes, or the eyes of society, but then you make them feel guilty if they don't do it, that is another sign that this person is codependent. Another sign is, people who would say, "My goodness, I've done so much for you. Can't you even do this?" And as many times, and I'm not trying to lay it squarely just on parents, but many times I have found parents sometimes can be codependent on their children. Parents
Mm.
can say, "Well, I've raised you and I've done so much for you. I've sacrificed for you." Well, yes, they have. Thank you so much. But now you owe me by doing this and doing that. Now, I'm not talking about doing good things like
Yeah.
studying hard for your exam. That's a good thing. But now
Right.
you owe me, so you cannot, I don't know, you cannot marry this woman. I
Yeah.
raised you. I've done so much for you. I disapprove of her. You cannot marry her. And you owe me. You owe me, so I can control your life from now on because I raised you.
Mm.
There is a book called, and I remember the other podcast that we've had, Greg. I sometimes mention books that people can get, and I've on Instagram and also on just text messages and emails. People have written to me and saying, "Oh, I bought that book that you mentioned on Hacker Podcast, and it's really helping me." And so
That's
I'm
awesome.
advertising for these authors, obviously, but there is a book called The Mom Factor. And it
Mom
is,
factor.
and this is not in any way a criticism against mothers out there. I'm a spiritual mother, to individuals, and it's a wonderful thing to be a mother, a father. But the mom factor talks about how unhealthy relationships with the mother can actually translate into unhealthy relationships with other people in recovery. When I say recovery, meaning if you're getting counseling, in recovery, we refer to boundaries to describe a very, very important characteristic of codependency. What I mean is that the codependent person, they are not able to form boundaries. So when I counsel a codependent person, one of the first things I try to, I don't like using this word, but I'll use it to test whether they have sufficient healthy boundaries in their lives. And if they don't, then I let them know, look, once you start putting boundaries in your life, then you are not going to have such toxic relationships in your life.
Right.
Codependency in itself is toxic. Codependency
Mm.
is a person who desires the approval. They like to be needed.
Mm.
Codependent people need, in fact, not just like to be needed. Um, it's worse than that. It is they need to be needed. And
Mm.
when they are not needed, that means when the person that they feel should need them no longer needs them, they find that their life has lost its purpose. How terrible. How
Yeah.
terrible that your whole purpose in life is to be needed by one person.
Mm.
And I mean, people can need you for a few years, and then after that, they may not need you. You need to be able to move on and establish other relationships. Codependent people are stuck. They're stuck because they are not able to to separate what is healthy and what is not. They're not able to separate relationships from their lives. It's all one big muddle, really. It's all up,
Mm.
kind of, it's all there. And codependent people expect others to be mind readers. I'm telling you, there's about 20, 30 characteristics of codependency. And they expect others to read their mind and hope that things will change without any effort on their part to help people, to help the situation. They expect you to walk into the house and read your mind. That
Mm.
means, if I'm all dressed up and look nice for a change, I expect my loved ones to come in, look at the fact that I'm dressed up and read my mind, thinking that, oh, I'm sure if they see me like, dressed up, they're going to think I'm ready to go out for dinner. So I don't communicate that with them, but I'm expecting people to take me out for dinner or do something special just because I'm dressed up.
Mm.
I don't care if you've been married for 30 years. My husband and I have been married for 31 years now. And to expect them to read your mind, or to expect your spouse to, the husband expecting the wife, or the wife expecting the husband, or parents expecting their children to read their mind is very unhealthy, because, that means you're saying that, you know exactly what I need without my communicating my need to you.
Yeah.
That's a lack of
Communication is so
boundary.
important.
Yeah,
Mm.
it is very, very important. I know I've just sort of gone here and there and whatever, but this is really a kind of an intro on
Yeah.
what
It's
I'd
just
like to be
a.
talking about. Yeah.
It's sort of just laying the foundation. But what I gathered from that introduction is that you could be someone who is codependent without really realizing it if you're not examining your interactions and you're not examining your relationships. And it's not only parents, and it's not only um, husband wife relationship or married relationship, but it could be friendships, it can be any types of relationship.
Yes, it could be any types of relationship. You get codependent people across the board,
Mm.
and until they are healed of that codependency. And yes, I believe with all my heart that there is a way out of codependency. It takes practice. It takes breaking certain toxic habits. It takes cognitively restructuring the way you think about yourself and about God and about other people, and applying boundaries. But you can get to the end of that very dark tunnel. You can get
Mm.
to the end of it. There is light at the end of that tunnel, and you can, uh, uh, start having healthy relationship and stop being codependent.
Right.
Having loose boundaries doesn't help. Having loose boundaries means, people can push your boundaries anytime, or you push other people's boundaries. You're a boundary resistor. Boundary resistance is where somebody puts a boundary with you and says, well, you can't, I don't want you to behave in such a way, but then you keep pushing back. You keep
Mm.
guilt tripping them into either removing or loosening, or their boundaries, or somehow
Yeah.
you expect them not to put those lines with you because of certain, and codependent people can be toxic like that. They're like, well, like I said, they guilt trip people. I've done so much for you, I cannot believe you know you're not inviting me for your special Christmas dinner. I've done so much for you. I've been your best friend for 25 years, and you're not inviting me. And you're like, well, this Christmas dinner is for another group of friends of mine. You're coming to another one, but this is for another group. Why do I have to invite you to every party? And this person, well, because I've been your friend. I don't know, I've helped you paint your house. I've helped you build your fence. I've babysat your children. You owe me. And that's a codependent person. That's very, very unhealthy. Very
Yeah.
unhealthy.
Wow. And
Mm.
so you you're starting off here. We're starting off here talking about boundaries,
Mhm.
and are we born with boundaries? Are there boundaries that as children or whatever we've already set up, or are these things we have to develop?
Yes, boundaries are developed. Nobody's born with boundaries. Babies are not born with boundaries. Boundaries are taught, learned, applied, developed. So
Mm,
if I teach you boundaries, Greg, you teach me some boundaries, then I have to respect you enough to receive that. Well, these are your boundaries. I have to apply them in our relationship and learn more about you by through applying these boundaries. The thing about boundaries is there's two main points that I want to mention now before I forget. And the thing about boundaries is this. First of all, boundaries have to be communicated.
mm,
You cannot guesswork somebody's boundary. I mean, you could if you've lived with them long enough. If you know they're your children or parents or spouse, you might know what their boundaries are just by observation, by observing their life. You might know some of their boundaries, but it is still better to communicate boundaries to your husband, to your friends, to your children, to your friends. I said friends already, to your parents. Because, as I said, don't assume that they know what your boundaries are.
right.
You can just say, these are. I don't want you to do this in my house
Mm,
because it's my home. I'd rather you did not do this. So if they respect you, they would say, I won't do it. Now, if they don't and they're pushing back on those boundaries and they resist it, they're a boundary resistor, then you need to communicate again. But communication alone is not enough. So these are the two main points. One is you communicate your boundary, and the second is you have to have consequences if the boundaries are broken. If there are no
mm,
consequences to a broken boundary, then that boundary is, you're not going to be able to implement the boundary. For example, you're a father of beautiful children. I miss them, Greg. And, and so say hello to them for me.
I will.
And,
I will.
say, for example, your daughter, um, she knows that she's not supposed to do something, but she does it anyway. Daddy loves me.
Right.
Daddy loves me, and I know he has said this 2 or 3 times, but I mean, I've not gotten a smack. I've not
Mm,
gotten a smack. I've not gotten a lecture. I haven't gotten a whatever. So I'm gonna just do it again. See what Daddy says. So now Daddy comes home after a long day, and he's in no mood. So he tells the daughter, "No, I am going to have to give you some kind of punishment, time out. I'm going to have to give you a timeout. I'm going to have to scold you or discipline you in some way because somehow you think that because there's not been consequences in the past, you can keep crossing the boundary lines."
mm,
So an adult, it's the same way. If I have told a friend of mine or my husband or my child or whoever that I have a relationship with, if I've said to them, please do not do this, and they keep doing it, I'll have to have consequences. So
mm,
if I told somebody, please don't smoke in my house, because it's a smoke-free environment. You shouldn't smoke at all. But if you want to smoke, don't do it in my house. You can
right.
do it somewhere else. I mean, if you really want to kill yourself. But the thing is, but if they continue to smoke, I have an option. They're no longer welcome in my house. I will let them
Mm,
know that they have to leave. I won't invite them back because they're doing things out of disrespect.
right.
Okay, so uh, how do you know somebody has boundary issues? Well, if they feel people take advantage of them and use their emotions for their own gain. For example, if I use your emotions, Greg, for my
Mm-hmm.
gain,
Mm-hmm.
I have a boundary issue, and so do you. You have a boundary issue because you're allowing me to take advantage of you. You're
Mm.
allowing me to use your emotional state for my own gain rather than putting a stop to it.
So what do you mean by that?
Okay, for
emotional
example,
state.
in counseling, I've asked people, do you sometimes get the feeling that people take advantage of you? They just use you, and because you know that they love you, you know that they are connected to you, you just continue to use them for their own gain, but you're not pouring back into them. You're not giving, there's no trade-off. It's very one-sided. There's no trade-off. You're not loving them equally or more. You're not serving them. They're just serving you all the time. But you're not doing anything to serve them, to love them, to make sure that they are okay and they are fine and they are safe. You just take. Well, the person that I'm taking from, Greg, it does not have boundaries. They're just allowing me to continue to use their affection for me, their emotions. Well, it could be affection, and the emotions could be even their sense of lack of self-worth. If they don't have any self-worth, they're not going to care if I use them, because they would think they don't deserve any better.
Right.
They would think I don't deserve any better. It's better to be used by this person than not be used. At least I have some sort of worth being, doing them favors. The person who thinks on those terms, Greg, first of all, you will lose your life. You won't have a life. You won't have a healthy life. You would be at the beck and call of everyone that gives you momentary worth. I'm counseling someone right now, and of course, for confidentiality, I won't be able to share who they are, location or name or whatever. But because they lack self-worth, it is very easy for someone who has more power in their lives, say, for example, someone in leadership, someone in ministry who has more power, to be able to manipulate them. All the person in leadership has to do is offer them, say, a position or offer them something. Because they don't have any self-worth, they are easily now opening themselves up to being controlled by the person that's giving them this position. You don't have any self-worth, so I'm going to give you this position so that you feel good about yourself, but you owe me, because if you don't do what I say, if I cannot control you any longer, you will lose your position. Now, you don't want to lose your position. So I will, in fact, give you multiple positions. Just so, I don't know whether I'm going to get in trouble for this. I might get some emails from wonderful leaders. But there are wonderful leaders out there, good, healthy leaders that don't use positions to control.
Yeah.
They give you a position because they feel that will help you grow, that is your calling. They recognize your gift and your calling, and a leader offers you a position that is matches your gifts, matches your calling, matches your passion, and also activates the gift in them and guides them on how to continue activating the gift. That's not using in a negative way. That's allowing God to use the leader as a channel to use this individual. That's different.
Right.
God uses me. God uses you. You're used all over the world right now because of this podcast. And but that's your gift, and you have a gift for this, and God is using you that way. But I am very wary about individuals that will give you, 5 or 6 positions just so you feel good about yourself. Nothing to do with your passion or calling or whatever, but just so you would feel self-worth, but then use that position to control that individual.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, that's not good. And there are individuals like that. There are leaders like that. And there are parents like that. There are husbands and wives like that. They will do you a lot of favors so that they can somehow get you to the place where you are almost afraid that you will lose your position if you don't do what they want you to do. And therefore, that relationship now has taken on an unhealthy aspect. And what is the unhealthy aspect? One person is controlling the other person through positions.
Yeah. Wow.
I know it's quite heavy stuff. Boundaries, healthy boundaries versus unhealthy, loose boundaries, and codependency.
And we've only just scratched the surface. So we're
Yes.
kind of looking at how to develop boundaries, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
What do healthy boundaries look like? So if someone is trying to like maybe they're recognizing that they're struggling in this area, or they may not recognize it yet, but how could someone see what a healthy boundary looks like if it hasn't been
In
established in
order
their life
to,
before?
yes, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Thank you. Yes, that's a great question. Very good question. I think that it's important for us to know what healthy boundaries look like by looking at a boundaryless life. A
Okay.
life without boundaries would sort of paint a picture of what healthy boundaries could look like. Right?
Okay.
For example, when I said, if you feel that people always take advantage of you, giving and giving and giving, and there's nothing flowing back into your life, you don't have boundaries. The person that's giving doesn't have boundaries. I
Mm.
know the Bible that God said to give. Lay
Right.
down your life. By this they will know you are my disciples. If you lay down your life for your brother. Laying down your life means laying it down for the gospel.
Right.
If you really check that scripture out, it's been misread and misinterpreted all the time. It's not lay down your life, let everybody walk all over you. No, you lay it down for the sake of the gospel, so that the gospel is preached throughout all the earth. You give of your time, you give of your strength, you give of your space, your resources, you make it available to God. That is laying down your life
Right.
for the sake of for your brothers and for the sake of the gospel. That
Mm-hmm.
means there is nothing you will not do for the gospel to be preached. But that doesn't mean you let people walk all over you and have a boundaryless relationship with you. Then you are actually, what, you're damaging your capability of spreading the gospel, because then people are taking advantage of you, walking all over you. You don't have a life. You don't have time. You actually become, emotionally and mentally and physically sick and spiritually
Mm.
sick because somebody else is, because of your lack of boundaries. So you're useless. Useless
Yeah.
meaning that you're no longer useful to God to spread the gospel. Most of the time, you're in the hospital,
Well,
or with a counselor.
yeah.
Um,
All you'd have to do is think about what if there was a church without boundaries. Like if there was an entire church that existed without boundaries, the pastor didn't have boundaries, the leadership didn't have boundaries, that would actually do damage to the spreading of the gospel. So,
it's interesting you
know,
asked me that. There
yeah.
are churches like that where leaders do not have boundaries. The church itself doesn't have boundaries. The gospel is not given any preeminence because there's no boundaries. There are no
Mm.
boundaries. And so what happens is the entire church gets weaker and weaker and weaker because of the lack of boundaries.
Wow.
No, you cannot live like this. No, you cannot do that. No, I will not try to just keep you by giving you positions.
Mm.
You must love God. You must want to stay in this church, in the church, not just this church, but a church.
Right.
Well, the
Right.
church. And you must want to stay because you love God. I'm not going to dangle a carrot in front of you so that you'll stay. Anyone who does that, that's boundaryless leadership.
Mm.
That's an
So you,
entire chapter by itself.
yeah, I think I just threw off your train of thought there,
No,
but
no, 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 you did not. You're asking
okay, good.
extremely good questions, Greg. Okay, but going back to how does healthy boundaries look like? For example, um, do you know someone, Greg, in your life, or if not in your life, have you observed someone who always feels they are having to save people that are close to them? They always get into this "I need to save them" role. I need to
Mm.
save them, meaning that if they don't have a job. For example, I actually counseled a mother, and I don't know whether I shared this on Hacker Podcast in the past, but I counseled a mother who had a grown-up child. I mean, grown up, in his
Yeah.
30s, lives with his mother. And when she came to counseling, to me, she was struggling with anxiety and depression because she had a grown-up son that just wouldn't go to work. All he did was just sleep in, get up late, eat the food that he did not contribute to, and he didn't contribute to the rent or the groceries, nothing. The mother took care of everything because the mother began to believe. The mother was very codependent, And this is another characteristic of codependency. Codependent people think that their sole calling or sole thing in life is to rescue other people. So they won't let you be responsible for your job, your income, or whatever. They will take on the responsibility for your livelihood. So they'll feed you and clothe you and let you stay for free and never allow you to grow into a mature, functioning adult. So this young man never was not a functioning adult. He was an adult, but he was dysfunctional. The reason he was dysfunctional is because his mother, and yes, his mother was shocked when I placed the blame squarely on her. Because she came to me not to complain about the son. She came to me because she had high anxiety levels and she was depressed and anxious, and she was wanting to know whether she needed to go on anti-anxiety medication and antidepressants. So I don't just prescribe stuff or get people to go to the doctor and prescribe stuff, because I don't believe that the answers to every single disorder, especially anxiety and depression, I don't believe that at the very maybe it could be a last resort, but it's certainly not the first resort as far as I'm concerned. I don't believe it's always the answer is inside a bottle.
Right.
So I told this lady, I said, you know what, let's talk about your life. I mean, there must be something triggering your anxiety. She said, no, I have a good life. I've got good friends. I own my own home. I'm a widow. My husband passed away several years ago, and I've got a good life. But then the more I talked to her, the more she mentioned this son. And the more I dug, I uncovered that we both uncovered that she had a very unhealthy relationship with this grown-up man who would bring all kinds of stuff to the house. I mean, substance. He was an addict. He brought stuff. He brought women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And she was so afraid to lose his love. Those were her words. I'm so afraid to lose his affections. I'm so afraid that he will shut me out and never speak to me again if I put those boundaries you're telling me to put and tell him to get a job and leave. Those were my boundaries, because she told me, what do I do? I said, well, tell him to get a job and leave, and not necessarily in that order. You can tell him to leave first, and then he'll have to get a job because he'll have to eat.
Right. So
she said, but that's my son. I said, well, you're not his mother, I told him. And she said, no, I am his mom. I said, no, you've become his caregiver. He has relabeled you. Mm-hmm. He has now given you a new label. You're his caregiver, babysitter, clothes and laundry woman. You're his laundry woman and dishwasher and cook and 24-hour police force, because you are awake until he comes home, even if it's at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And you go to his room and pick up all of his dirty stuff and clean up his room, which is filthy. And you have found strangers in his room that you have had to ask them to leave. Yeah, you're anything but his mom. Because a mother has a different meaning altogether. She's a nurturer, but she's also a guide, a counselor. And somebody who's strong enough to say, not in my house. No, I'm changing the locks. She said, what? I said, yes. Give him 14 days notice, like you would a tenant. If I was a tenant in your house and I did exactly what your son was doing, would you honor your lease? If I was renting a room upstairs in your house, like your son, except that I pay for the room and he doesn't, would you honor your agreement with me? She said, no. I said, what would you do? She said, I'll tell you to get out. I said, right. Tell him to get out. She said, in 14 days. I said, yes. She said, I can't do that, Dr. Vani. And I said, no, you can, you don't want to. There's a difference. You can, you don't want to. You can tell me you don't want to. That'll be at least more honest. Don't tell me you can't. Anybody can. Most people don't want to. And she said, but he will never speak to me again. I said, he doesn't speak to you now, except to tell you to cook his meals and wash his clothes. And then she said, okay, well, she didn't tell him to leave in 14 days. Is this story helpful, Greg? Do you think?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
And she didn't tell him to leave in 14 days. In fact, she didn't come back to see me for counseling for a few months. because she knew if she came back, because the thing is, I told her, until you implement what I've told you to do, it's no point you coming back for further counseling and paying me for counseling, because I'm a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I get paid for counseling. And so I didn't want to take her money if she was not going to apply my counsel.
Right.
I don't do that. I don't use people and take their money and they are over and over again the same thing. There might be individuals that do that in psychology, and they just keep you as a patient for 5 years and take your money. There's no change. I don't do that. So she said, I don't think I can tell him to get out. He's my son. I love him here. Who's going to take care of him? You see, she is a codependent. Or she was. She's doing better now. And she was she felt that she constantly needed to save her son. That's called the Messiah complex.
Yeah.
The Messiah complex is where you feel that, you're like the Messiah. We've only have one Messiah, and he does it perfectly. He knows exactly how to save us. And he's got the strongest boundaries of all. My goodness. Nobody's got boundaries like Jesus Christ. You don't mess with these boundaries. But
interesting.
she had Messiah complex. If I don't save him, who else will? He's going to be on the street. He's going to be homeless if I don't keep him in my home. I'm like, you will be doing him the greatest favor of his life if you told him to leave your house, get a job, or whatever. Now, if he doesn't get a job, then he'll have to stay on a park bench or in a friend's house until the friend kicks him out. People are not going to put up with that kind of behavior. Because you've deceived yourself into thinking that this is love. That's not love. Some people use that terminology, I love them to death. I wish people would stop loving people to death, because that's what she was doing. She was loving him to death. He was dying as a functioning adult. Love them to life. Don't love them to death.
That's good.
Tweet that. I'm just kidding. But anyway, and so she didn't want to do what I told her, so she didn't come back, because I told her there's no point you coming back and wasting your time and your resources by you're not applying what I'm telling you. So she didn't come back for a few months. When she finally came back, she was more anxious and depressed than ever. I told her the same thing, and I said, after this should be my last time I see you, because you still haven't done what you've done. But she had become stronger, or rather she'd become more tired of the whole situation at home. She'd become really fed up. And something else happened in the interim where I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Mm-hmm. So when I told her, my answer, she went back. She gave him 14 days notice. He was a boundary resistor. Of course he was. He was used to the good life, living off of his mother and eating his mother's food and living in a free home. Not even respecting that the mother needs her own privacy. Just continue to do whatever. And then when she gave him 14 days notice, he fought with her. He was very, very rude, very vile, actually. I'm being very mild here. He said things that no man should say to any human being, much less his mother. And he even tried to trash the house out of his anger. She had to call the police. And finally, the police told him the police actually took him away and then told him to leave. She called, so she calls me and I say, well, where is he? And she said, I think he's living with some friends. I said, good. She said, what do I do now? I said, the first thing is call the locksmith and change the locks, because he's got a spare key. He will come back. Like the flu. And he did try to come back. He tried to, open the front door, banged on the door and says, what? She said, well, I've changed the locks. You have to leave, otherwise I'll call the cops. He said to her, all that counseling that you're going to with Dr. Vani is not helping you. He's making you hateful to your son. I was actually quite happy with what he said. The counseling had shut the door on his you have to fix my problems, otherwise you're not a good mother, good spouse, or good child, or good whatever, good friend. So what does a healthy boundary look like there? Change the locks. A healthy boundary is no, you are not going to smoke in my house. You're not going to drink in my house. You're not going to bring strange women into your bedroom. You're not going to do this. You are going to have to leave. I know you're my son. I do love you. I'll show you I love you by praying for you. But I'm not going to love you by feeding you free food all the time. That's not love. Charity, God's charity, love, faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of this is love. Charity and love, God's way, is responsible love, responsible charity, tough love.
Yeah.
If I continue to sin and break God's boundaries by sinning, because sin is a breach of my boundary with God or God's boundary with me, then I cannot live with him in heaven.
Yeah, it's true.
I just can't. Now, if I repent and change and walk with him the way he wants and live like the way God wants me to live, I will live with him forever in heaven. If I don't, I can't.
Because he has boundaries.
Yes, because I'm living the way he doesn't want me to live. He's my father, but he's also holy. Of course God loves me, but he's also holy. He loves me and he's holy. He's not going to budge on the love. He will always love me. Even if I sin, he'll love me. Even if I'm in sin now, he'll still love me. But because he's holy, he's not going to budge on the holy part of him either. So because he's holy, there have to be consequences. You say, I do love you, but I'm holy. I can't have you living an unholy life and living with me. There's not going to be two groups of people in heaven. Unholy people and sinful people, and then another group is the holy people that walk with God. It's not going to be two groups of people. God's not confused. God's not going to cause confusion. There's only going to be one group of people in heaven, and that group is called the church. And the church is holy. The church is loved, but the church has boundaries, and the church has to follow God's boundaries because God has boundaries. God saves us, already has saved many of us, saved you, he saved me. But he's not a genie in a bottle. And for those who don't know what that means, it's a very mystical term, not biblical at all. But he's not a genie in a bottle. I don't rub the bottle and then God comes out and says, whatever you want, I'll fix your problems for you. Oh my goodness. God can fix my problems, but he's not going to fix my problems and let me stay the sinful me and not help me to grow so that I fix my own problems. He's not going to keep fixing my problems and keep rescuing me and allow me to be in sin. That means he's no longer the Christ. If he's going to do that he exists only to fix my problems, then he's a cosmic genie. That's all he is. He's not God. He's not the Savior. I don't follow a cosmic genie. I don't. I follow the Savior who says, if you love me, keep my commandments. My commandments are, you don't lie, you don't steal, you don't covet other people's stuff, you don't bear false witness, you honor your parents, in the Lord. You worship only one God. You don't worship 20 million gods. You worship only one God. You don't have any other God before me. If you do, that's idolatry. So he says, if you love me, keep my command. Look, I love you. This is how I want you to love me back. Don't love me back just by saying you love me. Talk's cheap. Don't love me just by trying to lift up your hands and sing a few songs on the weekends and thinking that that's love. Who can do that? The best actor can. But you obey my commandments. There are times you're going to fail. There are times you're going to be tempted to lie or tempted to lose your temper or tempted to be impatient with people. Come back to me and tell me what happened, and I will strengthen you. But walk with me because I do love you, but I'm also holy. Modern day parents I don't know whether this is a counseling, maybe it is, but in a counseling session, modern day, not just modern day parents, any parent, modern day parents, please, baby boomers or whoever you are, please stop telling yourself, oh, I had it real hard from my tough mom, so I'm just going to relax on my children and let them get away with murder, literally. Or let them get away with living the way they want, or messing up my home, or disrespecting me. Because, I had a tough mom, so I'm just going to be soft and kind. You do not raise children through guilt. You don't raise kids through guilt. Your filter cannot be a filter of guilt when you raise kids. You've got to raise kids the Bible says, according to the ways of the Lord.
Yeah. And you're saying guilt as in like guilt based on your previous
Guilt based on,
experiences?
my mom was tough on me and she was firm with me, and that's why I turned out to be a reasonably good functioning adult. Thank you, mother. But my children, I'm going to coddle them and not time out, and not have boundaries with them, and not have consequences when they behave badly, because I'm going to be just so much more easier on them. Because if I'm very hard, then I'm not a good mother. So you're trying to raise them through potentially feeling guilty. If I'm hard on them, then I'm not a good mother. That's guilt. That's not even of God. God's hard on me. He's not cruel. He's not mean, and he's not selfish. Opposite to all of that. But he is hard on me. He's not going to continue to put up with stupidity on my part. And for me to just live a boundaryless life, oh, I don't have to worship you. I can just do whatever. I can live a loose life in the world. I can do whatever I want, and I can just, fill my body with substance or whatever, and I can do whatever. I can break all your commandments. You're still going to love me. He will love me. He won't have me. That's all. I will miss out on living forever and ever, 10,000s and thousands and thousands of years in his presence. I will miss it, all that out, because the God that I worship has boundaries. The 10 Commandments are boundaries. Every one of those commandments, not just 10, all of the New Testament commandments. Jesus had commandments too in the New Testament.
Yeah, he did.
Commandments was not just Old Testament. The New Testament is full of commandments. I don't know why we don't call them commandments. It is. When he said, if you don't forgive others their trespasses against you, I'm not going to forgive you your trespass. That's a commandment to forgive.
Yeah.
And when he said, okay, pray in this way, our Father who art in heaven, that's a commandment to pray. When you pray, that's a commandment to pray. He didn't say if you pray. He said, when you pray, pray this way. When you fast.
Yeah, it's because he didn't provide like a list.
Yeah,
there isn't like a
because
list of 10 on a tablet. And so it's like, okay, well, there's...
Because it wasn't on a tablet, he thinks, we think that they are not commandments. They are commandments. And there are so many of his commandments are not hidden so much, but they are communicated through parables. Go ye and preach the gospel to all nations, baptizing them in the name. That's a commandment.
Yeah.
That's a commandment. That's as strong as one of the 10 commandments. So for us to say, well, God gave us 10 commandments. No, I'm sorry. I think he gave you many more than 10 commandments. He's probably given you 50,000 commandments. If you really studied it, not really 50,000, I don't know. But there are many commandments. The New Testament epistles, there's so many commandments there that God gave to Paul and Peter, James and John to communicate to the rest of us. All of the apostles' doctrine is our commandments.
Yeah.
Faith toward.
You see in the Old Testament. Well, you see in the Old Testament when he calls them out of Egypt, he starts establishing boundaries. And in the New Testament, as Jesus is teaching his people, again, he's establishing boundaries. So we can't call ourselves a Christian and not have boundaries.
You cannot be a Christian and not have boundaries. If you do not have boundaries, you need to go back to your Christian walk and go back to God and ask him to help you with them. Go back to God and go back to a good counselor that knows about boundaries, that can help you with boundaries. when your question was, how do you recognize whether a person has a healthy boundary, or the opposite of that question is, how do you recognize that they have boundary issues, is if they find themselves sucked into pointless fighting or debating regularly. You're say your children and the parents, they're sucked into pointless fighting, or pointless fighting with your boss or your colleagues, your friends, your siblings. They're sucked into it's somebody else's debate, it's somebody else's fight, but you keep getting sucked into the drama, you getting pulled into the chaos. You don't have boundaries. You need to stop that and say, I am not going to be pulled into this debate. You're constantly pulling me and sucking me into this pointless fighting. You have a problem with that person. You sort it out. Don't involve me.
Right.
I don't have a problem telling people not to involve me. I don't have a problem I really don't. This is not a brag or anything like that. I used to have boundary problems. I used to think that as a Christian, I needed to continue to just give and give and give until I didn't have anything anymore. I can't now. And there are individuals in my life that have crossed boundaries that I've had to block them. It is a function on our device that is quite useful. The blocking function.
Yeah. You can even do it on social media.
I'm sorry, but if you're going to blow up my phone and not respect me when I've told you, I appreciate your call, but can you call me 2 days from now and I might have an answer for you, but then you don't wait for the 2 days, you call me 20 times per day, you will possibly be blocked by me.
This might sound completely random, but this is something that I've established in my own life, is that I don't feel obligated to answer every call or text message as soon as it's sent. Unless it's urgent, like unless it's something that needs to be responded to straight away, or something's being planned or whatever. But if someone's calling me in the middle of something, I don't feel like I have to drop everything, answer the call, and then get back to what I'm doing. I can call them later.
You know why? Because you have strong boundaries as far as your stewardship of your time is concerned. And if you apply that boundary to other areas, and I'm sure you are, to other areas of your life, Greg, I'm telling you, there's so much peace that comes with boundaries. So much peace. I don't feel it is that I'm obligated to immediately answer somebody who demands my attention. If I am in the middle of something, I don't need to.
Right.
If in fact, there's one more thing in boundaries, is that, if you find that your relationships are like either it's black and white, meaning that it's not a gray area. It's like, it's either always amazing or it is horrible. It vacillates between amazing or horrible. No in between. That's another sign that you don't have boundaries. There's no middle ground. It's always either amazing, that means there's something going on there, because there are also times when it's horrible. Now, if it's amazing and once in a while middle ground, not so amazing, that's okay. But if it vacillates between amazing and horrible, there's something wrong, And my goodness, I have counseled premarital couples that are wanting to get married. And it's wonderful. I like premarital counseling because it's, we talk about challenges that they are going to face, no matter how lovey-dovey they are. They're going to face challenges, the money challenge, children's challenge, job challenges. One of them loses a job and stuff like that, emotional challenges and other challenges. And, but, if this couple is, they go through the breakup reunion pattern, like all the time, they're either breaking up or reuniting, not twice in their entire courtship, but all the time. Somebody doesn't have boundaries in that relationship, and you better run. You don't have to marry the guy or the girl. You don't have to. You can start again somewhere else. Don't marry them.
But they love me. I have to.
Yeah. I've had a premarital couple, actually. I asked the girl this question. I asked them both different questions, but this time I asked this girl. She was 20, 23, 24 years old. Sweet girl. Very sweet. The boy was really sweet as well. They both were so excited they were going to get married, and they were excited to go through premarital counseling with me until after the counseling was over. Then they were no longer excited. But I asked the girl, I said, so why do you want to marry this young man? It was a simple question. She looked at me for a while and thought about it. Then she said, because I believe that there's no one in this world that can make me happy the way he can.
She didn't know who she was talking to.
My goodness. I said, so you want to marry this young man because you feel that in this whole world, nobody can make you happy like he can. Yes. So if there's a day that he doesn't make you happy, then what? She said, oh no. I know that he will be the only one that will keep me happy all the time. That's a tall order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Only Jesus can do that. And even Jesus is not interested in keeping us happy. I'm sorry. I mean, Jesus is a loving God. He wants us to be happy, but he wants us to be more holy than happy. So his focus is more that I become more holy. His focus is not so much that I am happy, because that's some things that Jesus is going to do in my life. I'm not going to be too happy with it. But if it is going to make me more holy, see, even
Yeah,
Jesus
that's so good.
sometimes. But she said that he's going to keep me happy. That's why I'm marrying him. I wanted to turn around and tell him, you've got 10 minutes to run out of this office and never come back. I wanted to tell him, run, boy. Run now. She's not your wife yet. You still have a chance to lead a normal life instead of, that means I said, listen. And then of course, that set the theme for the entire 4 weeks of premarital counseling. Her answer set the theme of what, how unfair it is to put our happiness on the shoulders of our spouse. Because there are times when they're going to forget your birthday. Then what? They don't love you anymore. Or they're going to come home late one day, or they might somehow hurt your feelings. Does that mean you leave? Does that mean that they don't love you? Love really doesn't have a whole lot to do with how you make someone responsible for your happiness. Nobody is responsible for my happiness or yours, Greg. No one. Not even God. I am responsible for my own happiness. I need to find my own peace and happiness in what I do and what I don't do, in who I relate to, in the kind of relationships I have with people. No one is responsible for my happiness. That is unfair and cruel to put that kind of expectation on anyone, particularly a spouse. And that is why there's so much separation and divorce these days, because we expect the spouse to keep us happy. Yeah. The husband who demands that the wife keeps him happy in every way, or the wife that demands that the husband keep them happy. How do you even define happiness? What makes you happy today may not make you happy next year.
Yeah,
so now
that's what I was just thinking.
So the person who's responsible for your happiness also has to evolve along with your definition of happiness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, what made my wife happy today, what made my wife happy in 2010, 2011 when we got married is nowhere close to what makes her happy today.
Right.
So, yeah.
And so if she said, well, Greg, you are responsible for my happiness, and you better, come up to speed and evolve and make sure that you find out whether my standard of happiness has changed and what the things that made me happy 10 years ago still makes me happy now. And if you don't know what they are, then you don't love me anymore. Well, you are in trouble, Greg. But thank God, Steph is not that way at all.
No, she's not.
She's too godly and mature to even think on those terms. And she's very practical. My goodness, she's so down to earth. But yeah, another area where I find, and I know that we are way past our time, but people who spend a lot of time defending themselves, people who always, they always find themselves in a position where they defend themselves for things they're not even their fault, but they defend themselves for things that they believe that they don't have boundaries. They have boundary issues because they're always defensive. It's not their fault, but they are constantly apologizing. If you think you've done wrong, I think it is very important to apologize. When I feel that I've done something wrong or I've hurt somebody, I try to apologize. Sometimes I forget to, or I miss out on an opportunity and God reminds me to apologize. And I go to them and say, I'm really sorry about that. I shouldn't have done that. But I am not going to apologize for some things I didn't do. If,
Mm.
if I didn't do you wrong and I'm apologizing, what am I apologizing for?
Yeah. You're apologizing because they want you to apologize, not
They are
necessarily because you
manipulating
did
you to
anything wrong.
apologize. You're being guilt tripped.
Mm. Yeah.
And you don't have a boundary. You cannot
Mm.
recognize manipulation, or you know you're being manipulated, but you don't want to say no, so you keep apologizing, and so that you keep, kind of coddling them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My goodness, that's not going to change anybody. Apologies don't change people. Boundaries do. Boundaries change. Yes, boundaries change people because you either get them out of your life forever, or you keep some healthy people in your life, and your life becomes brighter, more peaceful, more time for you to do things that you've always wanted to do because you're not being sucked dry by somebody else. You're not being controlled by someone else. No carrot is being dangled in front of you so that they can control you. Boundaries change people. Boundaries are hard though, because they can be hurtful. Sadly, sometimes you've got
Mm.
to be direct, and sometimes it hurts. I've been told to my face, "Oh, you're so direct." That kind of once I was told, "That sounds a little mean." I don't know. Maybe they were right. Maybe I could have worded it differently, or maybe the way I said it came out a little harsh or a lot. I don't know. But I have boundaries and I cannot give them up. And I'm still trying to develop boundaries in other areas. I don't have my boundary thing all perfect and tidy. I don't think anybody does, but I certainly don't have. I'm not like 24/7. I have good boundaries. There are times when I've relaxed on my boundaries. I'm still learning to have good boundaries with certain individuals in my life, clients or different people, friends, church people, colleagues, parents. My father passed away, but boundaries.
Mm.
And I'm still getting there myself. But boundaries it changes people, and boundaries changes your own lives, and it changes your circumstances. It brings order out of chaos. No boundaries, chaos.
Mm.
Boundaries, healthy boundaries, that is. Then chaos is minimized, if not eradicated altogether.
Yeah.
But I keep saying healthy boundaries because unhealthy boundaries are, for example, loose boundaries. That means you put a boundary, but then there's no consequences if they step all over you anyway. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, never mind. She's only
Mm.
5, but she'll be 15 soon and she's not going to be cute any longer. Or when she's 37, she's really not going to be cute when she does the same thing she did when she was 5. She's only 5. I cannot be tough on her. But if I'm not consistent, and consistency is the other part of the boundary, meaning, are you consistent or are you changeable? When you're in a bad mood, you have this, you better not get in my way. And everybody's like, oh, that's a strong boundary. And then when you're in a good mood, you let people do whatever they want to your life. Your boundaries cannot be inconsistent according to your mood. You have to be consistent. God is. God doesn't say, well, you know what? I know it's hard on you yesterday for that sin, but today you can go ahead and sin. I'm not going to be hard. I'm having a great day. So don't worry about it. No. What was sin yesterday is sin today. Will be tomorrow. Because God doesn't change. He said that in the Bible. I am
Change.
God. I change not. He said.
That's right. Yep.
But we're so changeable, Greg.
Mm.
We're so changeable with our kids, with our spouse. There are days when I have a bad day Like I've not slept well, or some bad news comes, or I've been on the phone with somebody who's, anyway. But the thing is, and I have a bad day. My boundaries cannot change just because I have a bad day or a good day. You cannot raise kids based on your mood. I know parents who would smack the child when they're in a bad mood and hug the child for the same transgression when they're in a good mood. Bad parenting. The child is confused. Do I do it? Do I not do it? Is it? And they go according to moods. So then they will use parents' mood to manipulate the parents. Mom's in
Yeah,
a good mood. Let's show her the report card now.
yeah, they start establishing their own boundaries based on the inconsistencies that they're seeing in their parents. Yeah.
Parents who are inconsistent, spouses that are inconsistent, individuals, just friends that are inconsistent. It's very difficult to have relationships with them because you don't know how they're going to react from one moment to another. What do you do? Well, you cannot change people. You know that. I cannot change my spouse or my friend or my child or my parents. I can't change people. People who set about trying to change other people usually get frustrated because you can't change people. You can change yourself. How? First of all, have boundaries in your life. Change yourself. Don't be afraid to say no. But healthy boundaries doesn't mean you go around life saying no, 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 no. That's sad. Then you live in a cave. But healthy boundaries are you knowing when to say yes.
Yeah.
But knowing when to say yes, not just saying yes for the sake of approval. Because I need 20 friends around me to affirm me. So I'm going to say yes all the time to them because they think that I'm a great person. No, they'll just think that you are easily, you're easy to manipulate.
Yeah, being able to say no to things will allow you to say yes to other things. And if you say yes to everything, then you'll have to say
your no has no value.
Exactly.
Or in fact, your yes doesn't have any value. If you say yes to everything, it doesn't have any value, right?
Right.
It's like pearls to swine.
Yeah. But then also you'd fill up your calendar to the point where you can't say yes to the things you actually want to say yes to because you said yes to everything. You didn't set a boundary on your time.
That was my story in the past. And I have to be careful that it's not my story today, but that was my story a long time ago when we first started ministry, me and my husband. I said yes to everything. I mean, people could walk into my house and just, anyone. And they all said, oh, you're so sweet and loving. You allow anybody to walk in and walk out. And inside, I was feeling that my privacy was being invaded. I was not being respected. But I thought a good Christian should just not have any privacy. What privacy? Jesus died so that you will not have any privacy. He went on the cross so that your privacy is trashed. No, he didn't. No, he did not. That's not why he went on the cross. He went on the cross so that one day I'll become more like him. That's why he went on the cross. He died for me because he wanted me to be more like him. And what's him? A God with boundaries. I don't have any boundaries. I'm not becoming anything like him. Total failure. So there you go. It's people, and people used to do that. They'll just, take up all my time. I will just give my time and I will feel so sacrificial. Part of me will feel like I'm such a great Christian. There was spiritual pride in that too. I'm such a great Christian. I let anybody just walk in, walk out, do whatever. And then the other part of me, irritable, just irritated, frustrated because I was not getting my own space. Whose fault was that? Not theirs. They just thought that I was a wonderful pastor's wife. I was a frustrated pastor's wife.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the courage to have boundaries because it does take courage to have boundaries. I didn't have the courage. I lacked the courage to be honest with them. And I was dishonest with some of them by saying, no, it's okay. It's all right. When it wasn't.
Well, for the sake of boundaries, I think we should finish up this conversation here. This was just the first part of this, and then we're gonna meet another time and discuss ways that we can actually set boundaries. So helpful tips that you'll give to the listeners to help them start establishing some boundaries in
Yes.
their life. Was there anything else you wanted to leave us with
Well,
at
in
the end of
part
this
two,
first part?
in part two, I also want to talk about how to avoid or how to come out of a codependent situation, how to
Mm,
come out of it by applying boundaries. I know I touched on that a little bit today, but some more helpful hints on how to establish healthy relationship and not to get trapped in that codependent hole.
yeah.
How to recognize it from the get-go and come out of it, escape it.
Mm,
you know
yeah.
yeah, and all of that. For this part, well, I absolutely always have loved having a conversation with you. I hope this has not come out as a lecture. It almost did, but I your questions were so challenging and important, and I hope people will learn. God loves me. I must love myself. I must self-care. I must self-care. God cares for me. And how do I self-care? I apply healthy boundaries in my life so that I will last the long haul, so that mentally, emotionally, and physically and spiritually, I would be regenerated and refreshed and bring peace into my life rather than chaos. And teach others around me that we don't need unhealthy relationships. We don't need to feel fearful of applying healthy boundaries. God loves me. I must love myself. And if others around me love me, that's a bonus. But if they don't, I must depend and lean on the love of God. He gives me meaning, not people. He gives me a reason to want to be better. He thinks I have got great self-worth. I am his bride. So are you. We are his bride. We are his church. Of course I have self-worth. Of course I am a priceless trophy. In God's eyes, I'm a trophy. He saved me, cleansed me, washed me, and is using me for his glory. To say that I don't have any self-worth and thereby allow manipulators into my life and people who will control me by giving me so-called self-worth, I don't want that. I cannot afford to allow that in my life. I have such a short life. I can't afford to do that to me.